And we are live. Hello, everyone. I'm tuning in from Atlanta, Georgia tonight. I'm at an event, NFT and Tequila, hosted by Pop Mantra. As you know, I'm heavy out here in these crypto streets, and I love having conversations for the culture. Here at Digital Green Book, I love bringing high caliber individuals before you so you can get a deeper understanding of this space that we're in. Web3 is here and it is now. You are in for a treat tonight. I have with me tonight Kamal Hubbard. This gentleman has been on the ground in Africa launching DeFi protocols. So he's here to help us get a deeper understanding of what DeFi is looking like internationally. Thank you, Kamal, for being here tonight. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Afro Butterfly. To let's just make things clear here. I'm really just trying to get the message out about DeFi. I'm not, in Africa. I'm helping folks in Africa with the education piece of it, because when I work with a lot of regulators and legislators, what they talk about, what they can't, or where they have reservations around DeFi is the lack of consumer protections. And now, one way that we can mitigate that is through education and awareness. I know you're doing a lot with NFTs, and that's amazing. That's awesome. Congrats. Hands together for you on that. But if we understand that how these work, how these protocols work, understand how to use them, and really go in understanding that we're still in a period of caveat emptor, right? Buyer beware. And we understand the risks that are associated with NFTs, crypto, DeFi, then we can spot some of the fraud and avoid it. And, a lot of this is user error. Have you not burned some of your own coins by sending them to the wrong address, or can't find the keys to your wallet anymore? So, I've fallen victim to that, and basically shooting yourself in the foot. But if you understand that, the things that you can do in terms of best practices to avoid those things, then there you go, right? You're making yourself safer. You're keeping money in your wallet.
Well, I think that's a pretty honest statement to make. In fact, I like touching on my personal fumbles that I've had inside of this space as well, because I think that makes us more human and more relatable. One of the fears of adoption that the average layperson has is they're fearful that they're going to make a mistake and lose a lot of value or a lot of money inside of this market, when that while that is a strong possibility, if you're not educated inside of this space, I truly feel if you learn about how to safely interact with the protocols, how to safely store your seed phrases, how to safely move inside of the space, you should have a pretty good experience. But could you touch on that briefly for a second? Like, what's some of the less stellar experiences that you've had inside of the space as compared to the more stellar experiences you've had?
Well, too many to name, too many to name. But I, just like you, I want people to learn from my mistakes, right? You know, and once again, there's some mistakes that people just make, right? You're gonna go through the bumps and bruises, and the sooner you do those and you get through it, then the better off you are, right? But yes, like one of the things that I don't do often is I don't talk about, okay, hey, you know what? This one coin that I found, did a whatever, a 5x, 10x or anything like that. No, I don't do that. To a certain extent, I try to remain humble. I'm not a black Bitcoin billionaire. So, that's not a status I can kind of hang my hat on. But, at the same time, too, I definitely, like you said, there's a lot of people in crypto who won't talk about their losses, right? And they don't talk about what led to those losses. Me, I will tell people, hey, this is a cyclical thing. Like, in 2017, I was there during that. I did okay, and I quit my job. And 2018 hit, and we hit the bottom, and hit crypto winner. Like I was the embodiment of that meme. Can I have my job back? Right. So one thing I say is, hey, don't quit your day job. Right. Because as we move forward to mass adoption, the best way to position yourself is being an expert on blockchain. So when your industry adopts it, you can either make a move up, move laterally, or be the subject matter expert at your company, right? So the people who are trying to adopt it, hey, I know my stuff. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this, right? And then you can school your supervisor on, how they can get a wallet or whatever. But really, you got to be sure to maneuver that properly, right, in the workplace. So those are just some things that I like to share.
That's a good point, Fred, too, in the comments. It's all about education. If you don't know how to move in this space, then you're going to get burned. Exactly. Like if you're trying to buy a used car and you don't know what to look for, you're going to buy a lemon out here in these streets. And that's such a good point, Kamal. Like literally, when I think about adoption, I think of it in two ways. I think there's like conscious adoption where we're opting in and we're active participants and we're like, okay, we're all buying into this protocol. It's happening. It's happening now. We're all getting Oculus. We hopping in the metaverse. We're participants in Web3. It's here. Versus unconscious adoption. And I hate to say that I think so many people are fearful of this technology that there's going to be a lot of unconscious adoption where they don't even realize, like the government's already looking at CBDCs, those centralized bank digital currencies like a US dollar, a Fed coin. They're looking at centralizing the metaverse. They're trying to make DeFi not a thing. Governments don't like DeFi because that means they don't have control. They don't have the ability to tax you. Now, there are some very radical, or I wouldn't say radical, there are some forward-thinking governments that are on board with crypto. We earlier saw, what was it, El Salvador adopted it, Ukraine adopted it, I think Russia recently adopted Bitcoin. So there are some governments testing it out, wanting to be involved inside of the blockchain space. But when we're talking about the entire continent of Africa, and that's a large swath of land, the only protocol I personally have been aware of was like Charles Hoskinson was using Cardano to go into the Ethiopian government to sort of get children's school records on the blockchain, and they wanted to test that out for a few years to see how well it worked out. And I think we're about 9 or 10 months into that now, and seemingly it looks like it's working out even with the crypto pullback. Um, and they're sort of talking about adopting Cardano's blockchain and using that for driver's licenses, birth certificates, death certificates, things like that. And that's just Ethiopia. So what would you say, Kamal, are some protocols that you've seen that they're willing to adopt in other countries in Africa?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I did hear something about the Democratic Republic of Congo making Bitcoin legal tender. Now, there was something. The announcement of that was very much muted, right? Because when El Salvador announced it, the whole world was, really kind of split in two, right? You had Bitcoin maximalists on one side saying, yes, pump our bags, El Salvador. And then you had people who, aren't Bitcoin maximalists saying, well, is this really a good idea, right? But the situation with El Salvador is the US dollar is pretty much the predominant currency prior to Bitcoin. And however many months out from that announcement and that legal tender ruling, we can't say it's been a net positive or a net negative, right? So, it's kind of like we're at an impasse right now. We'll see as time goes on, but, to make a fluctuating digital asset legal tender and what you use on a daily basis, there's obviously risks involved with that, and so, but when it comes back to what you were saying about Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo was also looking to make Bitcoin legal tender. I don't know if they went through with that. And once again, there were seemed to be some outside forces that were also pushing that decision to happen. So that's,
Outside
really,
forces.
yeah.
You can't just ominously say outside forces and not give me some detail. What you mean outside
Well,
forces?
yeah, I mean, well, there's a lot of conflicts going on, and with so much capital flight in certain regions taking place, certain governments maybe putting pressure on other governments to do certain things that would operate towards their benefit. So, I don't want to name names, but maybe can put two and two together on that.
Snitches get stitches. I get it.
Hey,
So where
so
do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
no, well, I think you mentioned CBDCs and how governments don't like CBDCs. So there are some governments that, like the digital yuan in China, right? They rolled out the digital yuan during the Olympics earlier this year, and it was kind of like a lackluster rollout. And as you mentioned, the United States is researching CBDCs, and they're doing the research, but the actual development of US CBDC is still not at the same level and pace of many countries. So the United States is lagging behind in CBDC development and what it can do. And another thing that we need to consider is how secure, when we're talking from a critical infrastructure standpoint, is the United States Department of Homeland Security, or the Fed for that matter, right? So those are some things to think about, right? So if the Fed were to adopt a CBDC and they can't lock down the printing of those digital dollars, who's to say another country can't come in, hack, print a couple $1 billion digitally, and hey, we're going shopping.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair when I really think about it, because there's pros and cons and some neutral stuff in the middle about adoption, and there's pros and cons on not adoption. I think if the community was stronger, um, the adoption of DeFi would take off, because all it is, in my opinion, I just feel like it's a knowledge deficit. If the
Right.
common everyday layperson understood the power that they have right now due to the government's having a real strong lack of infrastructure inside of the blockchain space, we could get some stuff done.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that slows down innovation to a certain extent, right? Now, I mean, I think there's people on both sides of the argument whether or not the US dollar should remain the global settlement currency or not. And, I still kind of wrestle with that, that notion. But when you think about it, if we're behind in CBDC development, how can we remain the predominant currency, right? The settlement currency of the world. And so, so full disclosure, I spent some time this week at the Circle conference, and Circle is the backer of USDC. And so, they made a strong case for, really, they're making a strong case in Washington for stablecoin regulation. And it's not reactionary. Clearly, it's not knee jerk, because obviously, it's self-serving to a certain extent. But that is one thing that they said is like, well, hey, if the dollar is the world's settlement currency, it only makes sense to have as much liquidity of digital dollars as possible. Now, obviously they have a certain stance in terms of what that digital dollar is and what it means, but I thought that was a pretty compelling argument. And so but then again, they did announce.
Frustrated with that though, because it's like why I fell in love with Bitcoin,
Mhm.
specifically Bitcoin. I'm not a maximalist, but I love Bitcoin because of the purity of the concept of it. max supply,
Sure.
no
Sure.
redundancy.
Absolutely.
People can't just come in here like the fiat system and just print money every time we get into a jam, do a bailout. So I really am nervous for CBDCs because, as we've seen with some protocols like Ethereum, before they put a deflationary mechanism on it where it was burning off Ethereum every time you used it, it was an unknown amount of Ethereum out there and people were just buying into it, and off of the strength of the community, that we had ETH. Luckily, then they put the EIP 1559. They put a
Right.
deflationary mechanism in there, meaning every time you spent Ethereum, an equal amount of Ethereum was burned off the system to sort of stave off that inflationary effect with it. We don't have that with the US dollar. And if the government is simply going to roll over fiat dollars onto the blockchain, but they don't put a max supply or they don't put a deflationary mechanism in there, it's going to be the same thing all over again. They're going to have full discretion to make as many Fed dollars as they want, with the added benefit of tracking everyone's movement. And I'm not really I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah.
I
You,
like
you know,
like
it,
Bitcoin and other blockchains, but
and that was kind of a discussion I really didn't have with the circle folks that I wish I had. I mean, you get into the conversation. The conversations that I had were, they went in a lot of different directions, but just along the lines of what you're saying, I see a clash coming in the near future. And I just, for, ease of understanding, I equate it to the whole like Avengers Civil War thing, right? You're going to have Captain America on one side, Iron Man on the other, and it's basically representing who wants to KYC and who wants to remain anonymous and private. And once you pick those sides, I mean, you have to know how you can go from one side to the other, right? So if I'm a compliance professional, so I lean on the side of KYC, and I understand what comes with that, reporting to the IRS, so on and so forth. But the person who wants to remain anonymous, now there are, and I think what you said is very poignant, right? You don't want the government to know how much money you have at any given time, right? But not just that, I think it's the ability for the government to seize your money too, right? So that's a legitimate fear of people. Now, another thing too is what happens if you want to make a big ticket purchase, right? Like you're going to buy that yacht that you're going to buy. I know it's going to happen. I know you're going to invite me on the yacht. But when you buy it, you don't want that on the blockchain, or at least you don't want it attributed to you. So when can we legitimately use ZK rollups and zero knowledge proofs to obscure those big ticket transactions that won't expose people, right? Or, when you get ready to buy that Basquiat that you're going to buy, right? You don't want people to know you got that Basquiat.
especially not if your information's on the blockchain. I literally was just having a conversation with somebody about this earlier because NFTs, as you know, is just one umbrella under Web3. There's so many different
Sure.
ways you can do Web3. And we
Absolutely.
started talking about privacy protocols, and like one of the most popular ones, Monero. And he's like, well, how would it practically work? Like he was talking about a streaming platform. Like back in the day, some of us may or may not have used LimeWire. Some of us may or may not have used Napster. Some of us may have used BitTorrent. I don't know. But say you're doing activity on one of those types of systems and you want to pay somebody for commissioning whatever work, be it I buy a movie from you, I buy a yacht from you, then that calls for a privacy protocol. And then that brings the conversation right back to why do I even need a privacy protocol? And then it brings it back to, okay, if we're talking about information being publicly stored on the blockchain and every transaction that I do will be scrutinized, is it for safety or is it really about privacy?
Well,
It's
I
a
think
catch 22.
absolutely. And then, where I think we need to start, especially in America, is start looking at it from a constitutional lens, right? Now, if you're operating on a public blockchain, then, do you have a constitutional right to transact and feel as though you have privacy? Do you have an expectation of privacy if you're on a public blockchain? Obviously, the government, if they're prosecuting a case like that, is going to say, no, there is no Fourth Amendment right to, we have the right to search and seize whatever's on a public ledger, right? So then it goes into your point. When is it going to be legal and legitimate to use private networks or networks that can obscure transactions? And so, good luck on it. It's not going to happen overnight, right? We can't even agree on stablecoin regulation. So, when it gets down the road there, I don't know. We'll be lucky if we get it in 6 years.
Down the road gives me vibes of my cousin when I was a little girl telling me he was round the corner. How big is that corner? How far away is that corner? And I know you can't really put an ETA or a tracking number on adoption like that, but I was even having this conversation earlier as well. What would be the fastest road to adoption that did not have to originate from the government? So I'm thinking, unfortunately for our community, it might need to involve a celebrity, or it might need to somebody streamline the pathway so smooth where it's easy. And one of the best adoptions I could think of is, like, say Ticketmaster started selling their tickets as NFTs as opposed to as physical tickets, and then it had utility tied to it. So say I went to a Three Doors Down concert, and the ticket I bought yesterday gives me a discount to all future Three Doors Down concerts. People could make that transition easily. I mean, we come from a couponing culture, we come from a discount culture, sharing the link culture. Girl, you know I'm clowning. But it is what, if there were utility built in with a celebrity, like right now, like utility built in, not just this celebrity is associated or affiliated with this project. That's not enough. People need to see the immediate return on value to themselves. Then there might be mass adoption. But outside of that, I even with the best devs in the world, I've talked to some amazing developers, people who build metaverses, people who make the best AR codes I've ever seen, but they can't get their work quite out there because people don't understand it. So what would you say, Kamal, during your time that you spent in Africa, and you're trying to translate these ideas of DeFi to people who've never seen or heard or understood DeFi before? What was that onboarding conversation like? How did you make such a nebulous topic digestible to them?
Well, I think just, for sake of clarity, once again, like, I went to Africa a long time ago, actually prior to really Bitcoin even coming out. I work within Africa to educate people, to help orphan kids. One of the projects we did was in Kenya with a school called the Moonlight Center. And these are orphans, and really poor kids who can't afford school. So, wanted to get my book in their hands. I have another initiative coming up here for Nigeria very soon too. And, but I want to actually work with more schools here in the United States. I worked with a Saturday school here in San Francisco called Urban Ed, and also another place in Marin City. So, I want to do things here and there, but, I think we have to kind of look, or at least the way that I like to broach that conversation is, hey, look, we all need money, unfortunately, right? And if DeFi is the future of money, don't you want to get ahead of that curve? And what DeFi does is it opens up this financial system that we didn't have access to before. And all we need is an internet connection and an internet connected device. And you can have access to those financial services that really a lot of people didn't have access to, 20 years ago, even, really 5 years ago, some of them, when we're talking about like decentralized insurance and things like that. and derivatives as well. So, you know, I just try to frame it in the notion of, hey, Web3 is here, and we have the ability to leverage this technology to innovate and to create and really take the intermediaries out of it once again. Like if we're talking about music, we can take the labels out of it, right? If we're artists, NFT artists have been doing this, right, for the last couple of years, right? They've been innovating with art, taking the Christies and the Sotheby's out of the mix so that they're not exploited. But going back to what you said with celebrities is, and somebody mentioned this to me a few months ago, is what's really going to happen is a celebrity is going to get a number one hit song, and it's going to be an NFT or it's going to be on the blockchain. That's going to be the thing that's really going to catalyze, I think, people into greater adoption. Another thing too is forced adoption, right? So, something that I did very early on as a consultant was I helped people who fell victim to ransomware attacks. So, their computers got locked up. They needed Bitcoin to unlock it. And, I would urge them, hey, you should go to the FBI. They decided not to, and I would help them, get the Bitcoin that they needed to unlock their machines, right? So there's that, right? If once again, if you fall into a bad situation and your computer gets locked up and you need crypto to unlock it, you're kind of forced to get it, and you're once again forced to be in a situation. Another thing too, I think our Black businesses should start also taking in cryptocurrencies. I talked to a local vendor here in Oakland, and she said that she accepted Bitcoin years ago. And all she's been doing is accepting Bitcoin and just putting it off to the side. She never cashed any of it out. She never spent it or anything. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, just think
I
about that, right?
mean, things like that make a ton of sense to me. And again, even the practicality of telling Black vendors to accept crypto payments, it sort of assumes that they're in a comfortable enough position that they know that they're collecting the asset for safekeeping, and it assumes that they don't need that money for day-to-day operations. So there's still that burden of cashing out and then the tax implications and all these other things. But I do agree with you wholeheartedly. The most practical use of Web3 I've seen thus far are DAOs for both education and access to resources. So with decentralized autonomous organizations, say you have an NFT for your DAO and you have a huge community following, it makes sense. It makes sense. Forced adoption is a new concept for some people. Yeah, you gonna get it or you gonna get it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hey, like, I encourage a lot of artists to do that. I mean, just like going back to the Basquiat example, right? Think of how all those agents and auction houses, you know, basically profited off of his art. And so, uh, but I think another value proposition that NFTs provide is the engagement factor, right? And that is something also that I stress for artists and entertainers to do is engage as much as possible with your patrons. Say, hey, when you buy my NFT, here's what you're going to get down the road, right? So it's not just the ownership of the NFT, it's access to me, it's access to future work, it's access to, an inner circle of patrons or an inner community, an elevated tier, I guess you can say. There, make as many value adds as possible. And, I'm sure your audience knows about physical NFTs as well. So that can be another thing too.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, did I break up or
No, I think it was me because
okay?
I'm on my mobile device and I'm sure I am stressing my computer to f out. I'm sure. I'm sure.
Hey, it's all right. Sometimes it's me, but
But
you're in a better place than I am. You're there with NFTs and tequila,
people got to
so
get these NFTs out here in these streets. They got to get the
yeah.
education, and it was a pretty
Well,
good turnout. I
and
mean,
I'm here in the
Atlanta is a good.
library, just
I love your
bored and by
background.
myself.
I love it. I love it. But so, what would you say? I guess one of the questions I sort of want to leave the audience with, and I would love for you to answer is, if you right now, knowing that community is the biggest driving force of adoption, like people fully understanding what you want to do and everyone complicitly participating. If community was guaranteed, if you knew that you had community behind you, how would you, Kamal, what would be the most beautiful form of community adoption in Web3 for you? What would you like to see happen right now if community was involved and guaranteed?
Well, I just floated an idea to someone earlier today. Actually, don't want to talk about it too much, but when we look at community and we wonder what community is, obviously the internet has brought us closer, and I think Web3, whether we're talking about AR, VR, what XR, so on and so forth, DeFi, it's bringing us together. But something too that we also need to think about is how to do things locally, right? I mean, you're at a meetup, right, where you're talking about NFTs. That's a community, right? Now, it would be awesome if two people, or well, just people there, could find a way to do business with each other to begin circulating funds in the community. And the reassuring thing about that is you can be at that meetup, know who that person is, know that you're going to see them, the next week or the next month, and you guys can do business at an arm's length and be satisfied doing business with one another, right? And once that starts locally and you establish trust locally, it builds out regionally and then it builds out internationally. Um, that's what I would like to see, and just putting trust in ourselves, our own businesses, our own ingenuity, creativity, and culture, even though it varies from place to place. Um, and that becomes a global, sustainable Black economy.
Come through, Black economy. Come through,
Yeah.
Black economy. I
Well,
think that's what
that's
we want.
what my book is about.
Please, yeah.
So
Where can people pick up your book at?
at my website, www.kamalrhubbard.com.
All
That's
right,
the
you heard the people. And when do you stream regularly on Crypto with Kamal?
Yeah, you can find my podcasts really mostly wherever you find your podcast. I'm not going to say wherever you find your podcast, but Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and you can also find it on the Ebony Covering Black America podcast network as well.
Let's go. And is there anything else that you're working on? Because I'm all about people plugging what they need to plug. I'm all about that.
uh, I'm working on a lot of other things. So, don't be surprised if you get a call from me asking if you want to pitch in on something, or not even pitch in, but, if you want to collaborate on something. I'm open to collaboration. We all work differently too, though. That's the thing. But there's a lot of great people in this space, a lot of great people who look like us. So, I think we're at a point now where we're starting to trust each other to do business and find ways to, once again, I mean, just circulate these crypto dollars in these streets, like you said.
Well, I'm here for it. I'm so grateful for you having this chat with me tonight. That's all what this channel is about, is showing people that there's people that look like us that are out here in these streets actually trying to get things done, and that we're not a monolith. We're not tied to whatever stereotype they have of us out there. We're developers. We're Web3 educators. We're everything. We're everything. So thank you, Kamal, so much for being here tonight. Y'all make sure y'all bump the replay. This will be on LinkedIn, so you can share it to your network. This will be on YouTube, and then it should shortly be up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts as well.
Yeah,
So
one
definitely,
more thing. Sorry to cut
yeah,
you off that. Of
no,
course, I just
please.
thought about. I'm going on an upcoming book tour for DeFi for the Diaspora. And, hey, I'm coming to Atlanta. That's happening. But 2023, I'm going to be hitting the road. But I'm also going to be doing stops virtually too. So, in Dallas, that looks to be the first stop. So I'm looking forward to that.
Do you have a
And
date for that?
November 13th. So we're still
Okay.
working on the location, but keep that in mind. Anyone in the Dallas area, gonna love to have you guys come out. And also any STEM focused nonprofits out there in various cities that would like me to come out or have me speak once again in person or virtually, feel free to touch base with me. I'd be happy to work with you guys and do it for the community.
I'm all for that. And then also, that in Austin, Texas, November 11th through 17th is Afrotech.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna be in Dallas, you might want to go ahead and make that trek up to Austin, because that's gonna be your tribe. That's gonna be your people up
Yeah.
there in Austin.
Okay, I'm gonna consider that for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be black techies all over the place. So if you want a book tour, that's the time to do it.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, I'm gonna keep that in mind.
But thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much for Kamal.
Thank you, Afro Butterfly. Thank
Have a great
everybody.
night.
Thank you everybody for tuning in.